Hassan.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank you and Ranking Member Wyden for holding this hearing. To all four of our nominees, congratulations on your nomination, and thank you and your families for your willingness to serve. To the families here, thank you for sharing your loved ones with the people of this country in the work that they do. Mr. McIntosh and Mr. Callanan, I want to follow up on a line of questioning you've heard from some of my colleagues. I'd like to ask you about the Treasury Department's decision to roll back disclosure requirements for donations to nonprofit lobbying groups. I want you to understand the context that I am coming at this from. Big Pharma fueled the opioid crisis in New Hampshire and across this country by funding nonprofits that then spread fraudulent misinformation about addiction. Now, because of Treasury's decision, many of these nonprofits no longer have to disclose who their donors are to the IRS. In effect, the Treasury has hamstrung law enforcement's ability to follow the money and hold pharma accountable for fraud. However, despite these serious concerns, Treasury issued this decision without any public notice or comment period. So let me start by asking you, Mr. McIntosh, is it correct that as Treasury General Counsel, you signed off on issuing this decision without any public notice or comment period?
Senator, that was a determination made at the Internal Revenue Service. I was aware that it was going to be issued, but it ultimately was not my decision as to whether to do it pursuant to the Commissioner's authority to relieve reporting requirements by form or regulation.
So I'm finding it a little bit hard to believe that you weren't consulted or asked to sign off, but I take it from your answer that you think the Treasury acted within its authority in issuing this decision without public notice.
Senator, that's a subject that is currently in litigation, so I'm hesitant to go beyond the briefs. But there is a long tradition of the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service relieving reporting requirements without notice and comment, and indeed the regulation in question explicitly gave him that right. And there is a long tradition in the Obama and Clinton administrations of doing the same. So this is a long-standing authority of the Commission.
And I understand that, but to your point about it being in litigation, there are 2 states represented by colleagues of mine on this committee who are suing the Treasury for violating the law by failing to provide public notice of this decision. And I understand Treasury is contesting that. But I just wanted on the record that 2 states are suing because of this decision.
That is correct, Senator.
Okay. Now, Mr. Callanan, as Deputy General Counsel at Treasury, did you sign off on issuing this decision without any public notice?
Senator, thank you for the question. The analysis on this regulatory action, like all tax regulatory actions, is done in the first instance by our Office of Tax Policy and by the Office of IRS Chief Counsel. I reviewed the analysis that they did on both the substantive and procedural issues associated with this guidance document, again, as I do with respect to dozens of IRS and tax actions, and I was comfortable with the substantive and procedural legal considerations that it was within the statutory authority. I think the concerns you're describing, Senator, are questions of policy and tax administration, which are committed by law to the Commissioner and really are not a question for the Office of General Counsel.
I thank you for the answer. I will note that when this decision was made and the change was made, it was both Treasury and the IRS that put out a press release that said this was significant reform. So I also just want to bring you both to focus on the fact that there is a reason that Congress requires public notice. It is so that rules can't be changed behind closed doors to favor special interests. If you all had followed the law, or even if you don't think it was legally required, had exercised caution and perhaps a little bit of restraint here, you would have heard concerns about holding Big Pharma accountable and tracking down dark money donations, and perhaps you all might have made a different decision. That is the whole purpose of public comment. And now I'm faced, like so many others all across this country, with the fact that it is now going to be much harder when these kinds of interest groups are funded to catch the bad actors and hold them accountable. I want to move on to one other issue. Mr. McIntosh, as head of the Office of International Affairs, you'd be responsible for Treasury's efforts to strengthen U.S. economic ties with other countries through investment and trade agreements. That includes advancing our economic dialogue with China. I have heard from many New Hampshire businesses about the important economic issues we need to resolve with China, including intellectual property protection, competition from state-owned enterprises, and forced technology transfer. At the same time, many small businesses in my state are hurting from the administration's tariffs on Chinese goods and the uncertainty about the White House's strategy on China. As the Treasury Undersecretary for International Affairs, what would be your strategy for working with China to resolve economic issues while providing certainty to small businesses? What immediate steps would you take to implement this strategy?
Thank you, Senator. It's a terribly important question. I should note that my role as Undersecretary, were I to be confirmed, is limited to certain aspects of those trade negotiations, which are primarily led by the United States Trade Representative. I think that the key aspect of our negotiations with China, as the Secretary and others have said, is that there are a series of market-distorting practices you've described, non-market practices, forced technology transfers, forced joint ventures, a lack of respect for intellectual property rights, and ensuring that those aspects of any trade negotiation are captured in an agreement in a way that is transparent and enforceable would be the substantive priority. Procedurally, we would want to be pushing forward aggressively, as the Secretary and Ambassador Lighthizer are doing, on securing the agreement. It has to be the primary priority we face. And also, I would note that a key aspect of this effort is ensuring that our foreign partners understand our concerns, and are willing to stand up in multilateral fora and in their bilateral negotiations with the Chinese and highlight the same concerns that we have. Because I can tell you that quietly in the background, they share these concerns, and we need to present a unified front against the practices in question.
Well, I thank you for that answer. I raised some of these same issues with our trade representative when he was here a few weeks ago. I just want to reiterate how important it is that the administration take into account the impact of trade uncertainty on small businesses. And if confirmed, I hope you will remain focused on promoting economic dialogue with China, but in particular, making sure that there's some level of predictability and certainty for our small business community during what is a turbulent time.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.